Hi, this is Lawrence Penkler, and welcome to part 2 of this introduction to Massive X. In part 2, we're going to be having a look at the filter section, insert effects, master effects, as well as the assignation of modulation. Alright, so let's start by initializing Massive X by selecting the Initialize Massive X blank from the preset menu. What this does is it gives us a clean slate. We'll have no signal output until we've actually made some connections, and it just allows us to isolate the different components and keep track of exactly what's going on within Massive X, as well as give us a little bit of an overview of the routing as we're building things up. The letter F indicates the slot for the filters in the main interface and refers to the module within the router. If I select one of the 9 possible filter options from the Asimov, Blue Monarch, from the Moog emulation, there's a comb filter, creek filter, which has got some quite aggressive qualities, Groyan, scanner, and state variable filters, which can be single in parallel, which gives us 2 different points, as well as in series. You'll notice as I select some of these filter types, the Asimov, Monarch, and scanner, an FM input also becomes available. So to be able to integrate a filter into the architecture of the synthesizer, we're going to take a sound source, say oscillator 1, and run that through to the input of the filter to the output, bypassing the routers by right-clicking. So we're able to actually bypass the components directly in the router, should we want to determine the effect thereof. If I change the FM control at this point in time, it has no effect. It needs to be given an input, so let's feed it the input from the second oscillator, give it some level. And that is FM modulation of the actual filter itself. In addition to the FM modulation source available with certain filters, in the router we also have access to a pair of modules which allow us to implement feedback loops. The module with the arrow at the top is the input of the feedback loop. Right, so we can take the input from the output of the scanner over here, and the output of the feedback loop would be over here. So essentially what this does is it gives us a connection which would actually essentially be this, where we're able to create a loop that comes across. The feedback control is available under the amp section and has a high pass filter to be able to get rid of any low frequency problems that can be associated with feedback loops. So if we enable feedback, we're able to actually build up some of the low frequency content of a tone, as well as a whole bunch of other potentials. The next section that we're going to have a look at is the insert effects. There are 3 of them, A, B, and C, which appear at the bottom over here. And let's just reinitialize the interface again. Each of the insert slots gives us a choice of 11 different modules, which go from signal processing units like the anima, which allows us to enhance the tone of the oscillators. So if I run my oscillator through this A effect over here, directly to the output, we are able to affect the tone. It can be set to operate at LFO rates, which is the case here, or at audio rates when fast is enabled. Bit crusher, standard bit reduction. There's a utility which allows us to actually finalize sounds or just change levels at different points in the actual signal if things are getting a little bit out of control or need leveling. We can also curve the behavior of that level from exponential to logarithmic. And we've got a range control here as well. 2 filters can be applied in the utility as well. So these are standard filters, high pass and low pass. So we can band limit the signal using the utility as well. Very useful in terms of sound design. The folder utility allows us to apply anything from subtle saturation to more radical type of effects. We can also enable a high quality mode which implements an anti-aliasing filter, and there's also an offset which allows us to actually bias where the algorithm is applied. We also have access to a frequency shifter, which allows us to actually add some width as well, distortion. And then one of the very powerful features of our Massive X is that we can actually add in additional oscillators. These insert effects can actually host simple oscillators, sine, saw, or pulse, but we're able to actually add 3 different oscillators directly into the structure. We've got standard oscillators. We also have phase modulation oscillators, which we can use to create FM type algorithms by combining them and using different ratios between the different oscillators. We also have ring modulation modules, sample and hold, and a simple delay. Moving on to the master effects section. In the master effects, we have at least up until this point, we've been plugging directly into the output, indicated by the arrow over here. The master effects, we have different chains that we can implement. So we can have a series between X, Y, and Z, so X, Y, and Z, otherwise X plus Y, which is X and Y in parallel going into Z, or all 3 effects in parallel, which means that we can actually assign individual effects to different components of a sound design tone. In terms of options, we have a dimension expander, which is a chorus with stereo widening, equalizer, flanger, nonlinear lab, which is a distortion, phaser, quad chorus, reverb, stereo delay, and stereo expander. All of the stereo effects as well as the reverb sound really, really good. Quite often a synth will be supplemented by onboard processing. Native Instruments, being Native Instruments, have taken a lot of care in the audio quality of their processors, and they sound really quite amazing. Last but not least, let's talk about modulation assignation. So let's initialize Massive not to the blank but to the standard one, where we have most of the components that are pre-configured and connected. So we've got both oscillators that go through insert A, through the filter with a feedback loop that's set up, through insert B and C with a pulse modulation aux return, which is available here, as well as the FM input for the filter, the Asimov filter, coming from oscillator A. Then it goes through X, Y, and Z in series with the way that it's configured. Alright, so as with the original Massive, modulation is assigned by clicking on the modulator, be it a envelope, LFO, or transfer curve. We can also use the performer in exactly the same way, where we're able to actually send that through to most of the different parameters, which appear as white blocks below those parameters. So if I wanted to step through the first oscillator's wavetable, I'm using this one over here. So envelope 3, I'm actually going to change over to a standard LFO over here, and we're able to switch through to a more sort of a sine wave type, and then we can change the way that it behaves or scale it by using this, what they call Saturn rings, and scale that by mousing up and down. Most of the parameters have 2 or 3 different slots where we can add different modulation. So here I've got LFO 6 that is selected. I'm going to switch it as well again. Just bring that down to something a little bit more radical, and I'm going to scale this unidirectionally, so we're going to be just going up. And we can also modulate the rate of the LFO, so we can modulate the modulator, which opens up additional possibilities as well. So here what I'm going to do is I will take LFO 5 over here and put that onto LFO 6, the rate of LFO 6, and LFO 5 we will go unidirectional again with that, and we're just going to scale it like this and bring the rate down. The rate of the actual LFOs can also be configured between free, sync, and oscillator mode, which actually brings them into the audible range. And that is very much where the strength of the original Massive as well as this current incarnation of Massive lies. The Performer adds in additional possibilities in terms of more complex modulation curves. The Performer itself has its own manual, and that would be a different tutorial. Thank you for joining me for part 2 of this introduction to Massive X. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time.